I recently re-uploaded a video I made that was making fun of Ariel Helwani's cringe-inducing interview he did with Dricus du Plessis on March 8th. At the time, the video was only meant to make fun of Ariel for being the awkward liberal he is and to point out some comical moments of hypocrisy. I thought the whole real African champ storyline was funny, made even funnier by how uncomfortable it made Ariel. I thought Dricus's beef with Adesanya was nothing to get upset about, just another one of the countless petty squabbles that make up the very fabric of the masculine soap opera that is MMA. And then this happened.
Let's go, nigga. What's up, bitch? Let's go, nigga. Yeah, nigga. What's up, nigga?
And the world blew up.
This race infusion and the stare down they had on Saturday, along with the real part about that stare down, the intensity, no matter where it comes from, that intensity is freaking, you could feel it coming through the screen.
A lot of people were very uncomfortable with what happened after the fight, but it's a very uncomfortable situation. We are uncomfortable because apartheid is uncomfortable. Colonialism is uncomfortable.
Why does Francis Ngannou speak French? And why is Cameroon a fucking disaster? Right? Colonization destroyed Cameroon.
Before this fight, I didn't want DDP to win because I didn't want to go down this Holmes-Cooney boxing road.
He's an Afrikaans fighter from South Africa where there's a history of colonialism and there's a history of apartheid. Like,
what's up, nigga? Get this shit up. What the fuck you gonna do, nigga? Yeah, my African brother. Yeah, my African brother.
Ultimately, the real African champ storyline is unimportant. Fighters will always find silly reasons to beef, but what I do find to be important is how the media is covering it, and there is no better personification of the liberal MMA media than Ariel Helwani.
We're all white. We talk like this is uncomfortable stuff.
Ariel is known as a shit stirrer. However, he generally does a fairly decent job of keeping his nose clean by staying out of the larger, more controversial political issues. This political ambivalence has been a great help to Ariel's career in booking guests and getting along with a wide variety of characters across the political spectrum.
So I like, as an interviewer, I'm the type of interviewer that likes to let his guests speak. I didn't invite you on to debate because to me, that's not what you signed up for. So even though this is a different kind of interview, so that's why I will gladly let you say what you want to say as long as it's not offensive and you haven't said anything that's offensive. I don't agree. Just for the record, I feel like you're saying what you're feeling. I could say what I feel. I don't agree with a lot of the things that you said, but that doesn't make me think any differently of you. I know people who I'm related to who voted for Trump.
However, ignoring politics has also left him with no strong basis with which to parse through difficult issues when he's forcibly confronted with them.
So what do you want me to do? What do you want the MMA media to do? And even this, I could guarantee you, even this clip right here, you'll see people be like, look at this spineless coward. What do you want us to do?
With no political compass of his own, Ariel will always fall back to the lowest level of analysis, citing the status quo. In this way, Ariel Helwani is the perfect milquetoast liberal. We see this when he's struggling to find a reason to rebuke the fighters that visited Ramzan Kadyrov.
The countless fighters who happily associate with the Chechen dictator Ramzan Kadyrov, Usman, Cejudo, Gaethje just recently. You can pick and choose who you want to watch. That's the beauty of MMA. If those guys are fighting, don't buy their pay-per-views. Don't buy their fights. Don't buy their merch. Don't buy anything. Pick and choose. But that's kind of a cop-out answer, right? Given how this country, whom they are proud citizens of, who the likes of Henry Cejudo has represented on the world stage, who the likes of Justin Gaethje walks to his fights holding the flag of, who the likes of Kamaru Usman has said gave him and his family, a better life and opportunity and the American dream and all this stuff. And in this climate, to go over there and partake in this stuff when this country views that individual as a war criminal, as a dictator, what are you thinking? Is my thought. My initial thought is, what are you thinking?
Not because of his widespread human rights abuses or kidnapping, torture, and assassination of political dissidents, but because America doesn't like him.
I don't blame you if you see that stuff and feel like, what? How, Mr. America is over there doing that? Mr. U.S. Olympian is over there doing that? How do we come to terms with that? And so they're going to go over there and they're going to get paid and they're going to get paid handsomely and it's going to be all good in the hood. And so if that's what they want to do, God bless.
Or when Ariel's criticizing Dana for slapping his wife, saying Dana should be punished because that's what happens in the real world.
Striking a woman, who, by the way, is not just any random woman, because you got struck first. No, that's not how this goes. And anyone who is saying that, shame on you. It is completely, absolutely embarrassing that anyone is defending this. All's fair. Equal rights. Excuse me, where I come from, you get slapped by a woman 10 times, you walk away. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if that to you feels like I don't believe in equal rights, then fine. Because to me, equal rights is treating women fairly, treating women like we want to be treated. Women get paid the same, get the same opportunities. That's equal rights. This justification that because I have to live with my actions, that's punishment enough, doesn't fly, because it doesn't fly in any society. That's not the society we live in, because we are taught that when bad things happen, there are repercussions. What are the repercussions here?
Just one more thing on the idea of like the crime is the punishment. I mean, that just can't be
right.
Stance. But in the world we live in, that is just
that's
not
just
sufficient.
not. I mean, in no walk of life.
After demonstrating such an unstable basis for analyzing even the most basic of politically charged issues, I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised by how bad his analysis of the Dricus versus Adesanya beef was, but it was the sheer lack of substance and journalistic integrity that baffled me to the point of making this video. The Monday after the explosive face-off between Dricus du Plessis and Israel Adesanya, Ariel went over all of the relevant footage to provide context for the feud.
When it comes to these like heavy-duty topics, we like to bring out the actual facts in chronological order and let you decide who's telling the truth, who's not, who's in the right, who's not, or just to understand where this is all coming from.
This isn't purely informative, however, as Ariel provides some additional context of his own.
It is complicated, it is divisive, it is at times uncomfortable, and do have to acknowledge that, you know, we don't live in Africa. We did not live through the history. We did not, we're not subjected to it. We don't have family members who've lived through it or currently live there. We're all white. We talk like this is uncomfortable stuff.
But unlike previous moments, Ariel doesn't even attempt to analyze how his context affects the matter at hand.
With a history that is so complex and divisive, and we all know where that history comes from and what it's all about, especially in that country and in that continent, but specifically the country of South Africa, where there's no denying and there's no interpretation. Like, it's just one way. It's all there. You can read about it, and it didn't conclude all that long ago. Considering the history, it's hard to ignore, you know, all the other stuff around all of this, and it feels like a very divisive route to take, when all that needed to be said, in my opinion, was, I'll be the greatest African champion of all time. Those guys are great. I'm going to be even greater. I'm going to defend my title 20 times. I'm going to be the best version of a UFC champion from this country. They were awesome, much respect. But the whole, I'm more African than you because I breathe the air and I'm African born, African raised, is going to strike a chord. And it did strike a chord.
Throwing out vague buzzwords such as colonialism and apartheid, yet never making an actual point.
Do you understand why this may have rubbed some people, including Kamaru and Israel, who we'll get to in a moment, the wrong way, given the history between whites and blacks in Africa? And given the history, and I keep talking about it, and look it up if you want. I'm not going to give you a history lesson here, but just look it up. Type in apartheid, and you'll learn all about it. And it ain't that old. And to ignore all of that, to me, is feigning ignorance.
Ariel repeatedly saying, look at the context, but refusing to elaborate and explain how the history of South Africa and Nigeria pertains to the beef between Dricus and Israel. Instead opting for, look it up yourself, I'm not going to give you a history lesson.
Look it up if you want. I'm not going to give you a history lesson here.
Is shockingly poor journalism. No self-respecting journalist would be caught dead using these fill-in-the-blank rhetorical tactics, which are commonly employed by crackpot conspiracy theorists, who are always hinting at something deeper, yet yet refusing to ever explicitly say how the dots connect. The vagueness of his claims and the unwillingness to precisely state how terms like apartheid, colonization, and white and black affect Dricus is a tool that Ariel uses to implicitly lead his audience to his conclusion without having to come right out and say it.
Look up the history of apartheid in South Africa, and you could probably understand why this is cutting the way it is cutting Israel Adesanya as much as it is. We have to consider the history, right? The history of South Africa and the history of, who's born, who's from there, who's not there, whose land it is. And that's different than you and Anderson, you and Vanderlei. That's a way deeper history, is it not? So we can't just ignore all of this stuff. That's the part that to me makes it uncomfortable. And then where people say like, "Oh, you're doing this, you're race baiting." No, it's right there. That's the history. We're talking about South African history right here. I'm from South Africa. You are not.
Ariel's done this before, notably in the Dana White wife-slapping incident, hinting repeatedly that Dana should get fired without ever coming right out and saying so.
You have to pay the consequences. You think everyone who, drives drunk and gets into an accident feels good about it? No, they don't. And they'll be labeled as such for the rest of their life. There's still consequences. Like, it's not just the feelings world that we're living in here. If I did something like that, I'd probably be fired from every job I have. So I'll have to live with it, but also face repercussions. Gil says there's no coming back from it. And people have been reprimanded for it. And that's not happening here. There has to be some sort of message that this won't fly, that this won't stand. So
the end result in this case is that Ariel effectively calls Dricus a racist colonizer while leaving enough plausible deniability to maintain his innocence, claiming that he is only reporting the facts.
I don't think that DDP, I think it's unfair to call him a racist, and I've never called him a racist. I just think that it's impossible to not talk about all of this when talking about it because of the history there. So I'm trying to enlighten and show you the timeline, the chronology of this whole situation and how it started. That's all we're doing here.
I've questioned Ariel's journalistic integrity before, namely when he blindly repeated Dan Hooker's unsubstantiated claims of cheating done by Islam Makhachev.
This morning, Dan Hooker has thrown out a very, very, very serious accusation towards Islam. He has made it very clear. He's not dancing. He is saying that he used an IV. Just to let you know, that is illegal. There's questions. When did he do it? How many times did he do it? Did he do it before the weigh-ins, after the weigh-ins? There's a difference between the two. There's a lot there.
Did he do it at all?
Did he do it at all? Of course. Accusation or not, people have to answer now to these accusations. Number one, USADA needs to figure this out. They know about it at this point.
Yeah.
Their reputation is at stake here. I feel personally like the relationship between the USADA organization and the UFC is a lot cozier than it should be. This is a massive accusation. This is a massive accusation that he's levying. The fact that it is out there, and if it is proven to be true, and I have no idea, and I'm not going to speculate, I'm not going to go into this rabbit hole, that would be extremely irresponsible of us. But this just adds another layer, if there is a shred of doubt involved in all of this, that maybe they need to run it back. I need answers now. People need to answer to this. And if there is some truth to this, we're talking at best, an immediate rematch. At worst, we're talking a potential suspension.
Yeah.
Look, we've known Dan Hooker to be a straight shooter. We've known him to be a guy who's not out to try to troll or, we see guys, you see people do things and be like, haha, I was just joking. This doesn't seem like it's a joke.
And while repeating spurious, unfounded accusations is bad enough, refusing to do any sort of research or proper analysis on a segment of his show he devotes upwards of 30 minutes to, all the while leading his audience on through the not-so-subtle framing of a fighter as racist is a new low for Helwani.
DDP may have not meant any of this, but this is the way it has been interpreted. That's the perception by some people, including the guy he's about to fight. And at times in life, perception is reality. And this has to be acknowledged.
Keep in mind, this isn't a segment brought about by a random question Ariel had no prior knowledge of.
Oh boy. Here's a long one with some annotations.
Those are always the best.
Yes.
This was a pre-agreed upon segment he had all weekend to prepare for. Either he was too lazy to do any sort of preparation and thought his liberal platitudes of colonialism and apartheid could cover his ass, or he is simply too stupid to do proper political analysis and sincerely believes that telling his audience to do their own research is enough.
And I'm sure there are people out there who are going to say, you're making a mountain out of a mole. Maybe those comments were a mole, but now we're on Mount freaking Everest here.
Either way, the result is the same. Ariel demonstrates a shockingly low level of journalistic integrity and lets his own biases color his commentary to the point of being embarrassingly apparent.
You heard what he just said. That's all I said. It was, I'm the only one residing here. Just for the record, go back to the March 1st comments.
Myself and Cameron, we breathe the African air. We wake up in Africa every day. We train in Africa. We're African born. We're African raised. We still reside in Africa. We train out of Africa. That's an African champion, and that's who I'll be.
African born, African raised. And for the record, they have brought their belts back. So again, it wasn't just about who's residing, and I don't even know why that matters, but if it does matter, great. I don't know how you can now, I believe, feign ignorance and say, oh, I'm just talking about residing when you're talking about African born, African raised, and given the history, I don't know if I've ever gotten so much hate for a discussion, which I thought we had pretty much down the middle.
We can't talk about Ariel Helwani without talking about bias. Every person has bias, but when in the position of a media member, such as Ariel is, it is your duty to at the very least attempt to be as unbiased as possible, especially during segments you are claiming are simply informative.
I'm trying to enlighten and show you the timeline, the chronology of this whole situation and how it started. That's all we're doing here.
Ariel has been biased before, and most clearly towards fighters and other personalities that come on his show often, and against those that refuse to come on. Ariel has a great symbiotic relationship with the fighters and coaches from Team City Kickboxing. They frequently come on his show, and in return he'll promote them in a positive light, and on more than one occasion, run defense for them. Let's examine how Ariel's biases affect his rundown of the Adesanya versus Plessis feud.
Some of the key words to look at there: I'm the African fighter in the UFC, African born, African raised. Obviously, there were 3 African born champions, and they didn't just enter the world and then leave 10 minutes later. But those were, I thought, like the key sort of seeds to making this all sprout into the situation that it has become.
The first hint of bias I noticed was how Ariel revisits Dricus' original statement about being the real African champ multiple times throughout the Monday show. He not only misquotes Dricus while doing this, selecting only the most controversial words from the sentence.
We breathe the African air. We wake up in Africa every day. We train in Africa. We're African born. We're African raised. We still reside in Africa. We train out of Africa. That's an African champion, and that's who I'll be.
Some of the key words to look at there: I'm the African fighter in the UFC, African born, African raised.
But also does so after he had brought Dricus onto his show and had him clarify these very comments. And yet, despite these clarifications, Ariel repeatedly ignores them and cherry picks the worst thing he can find Dricus saying.
But if you parse it all, when he says African born, African raised, whether or not he lives in Africa or not, he is born in Africa and he was raised in Africa. So I think that's the part that makes him upset. I'm talking about Izzy.
Ariel claims he is only doing this to highlight the source of the beef Israel and Usman have with Dricus. But even if this is true, the intention ultimately doesn't matter. It doesn't change the fact that Ariel is nitpicking through Dricus' original statement, a statement that he clarified on Ariel's very show, and misquoting him in an effort to frame him in as bad a light as possible.
Izzy is saying like, yo, you crossed the line here and you made this too personal. And DDP is saying like, oh, look, I'm just talking about who lives there. But if you go back to his original comments, this is how it all started between them.
Ariel excuses this framing of Dricus by saying perception is reality. And while this is true on an individual level, it seems that Ariel is speaking solely from Israel Adesanya's reality and is bending his audience's understanding of the situation to that reality.
This is all about how Izzy and Kamaru and Francis perceive those comments. Perception is reality, right? And some people are going to take it the wrong way. And I think Izzy took it the wrong way. DDP may have not meant any of this, but this is the way it has been interpreted. That's the perception by some people. including the guy he's about to fight. And at times in life, perception is reality. And this has to be acknowledged.
A reality that we know is flawed since, again, Dricus clarified his statements on Ariel's own show.
I asked DDP about the comments.
I will be the first champion that resides in Africa that will take his belt home to Africa. I never said they weren't African or I was more African. Of course they're African. I only stated that I want to be and will be the first residing African champion.
Let's take a moment to do a quick recap of the beef. Dricus said that he wanted to be the first real African champion.
Want to be the first real African champion.
Adesanya got all up in his feels because he thought Dricus said he wasn't African.
But who the fuck is this cracker to tell me who the fuck I am?
Dricus goes on the MMA Hour to clarify and says of course Adesanya is African.
I never said they weren't African or I was more African. Of course they're African.
Now Izzy wants to fight Dricus because he's mad at him.
But the fact that he was being a dickhead and we do be who the real African is.
And Dricus wants to fight Izzy because he has the belt. End of beef. This was a perfect opportunity for Ariel to use the interview from March to explain how Izzy was misunderstanding Dricus' intent.
Now you could say, hey, I didn't mean any of this, and that's great. And I believe that. But perception is reality, right? And some people are going to take it the wrong way. And I think Izzy took it the wrong way.
He could have said that Dricus' statement was badly phrased, but he cleared it all up on the MMA Hour a few months later, and now there should be no disagreement. Yet Ariel doesn't do that. He doubles down on Dricus being a dishonest actor, and implicitly frames him as race baiting.
I don't know how you can now, I believe, feign ignorance and say, oh, I'm just talking about residing when you're talking about African-born, African-raised, and given the history, type in apartheid, and you'll learn all about it. And it ain't that old. And to ignore all of that, to me, is feigning ignorance. I don't think that DDP, I think it's unfair to call him a racist, and I've never called him a racist. I just think that it's impossible to not talk about all of this when talking about it because of the history there.
All the while hiding under the veil that he's reporting from Adesanya's point of view.
Again, this is all about how Izzy and Kamaru and Francis perceive those comments.
Wednesday's show comes along, and Ariel takes on a much more personal tone than he had on Monday.
The one thing that they love to say, and the fanatics love to say, is that he never said real African. Show me where I've said real African.
He revels in the discovery of even more footage of Plessis talking about being the real African champ.
And I knew in the back of my mind that he did. I knew I wasn't making it up.
Want to be the first real African champ, trained, born, bred in Africa.
Want to be the first real African champ. And I see a lot of people say hey, trained, born champ. The point of contention is real African. What does that mean?
He seems personally vindicated by this, yet maintains he's being an objective observer, only trying to find the source of the disagreement Israel has with Dricus.
This is all about how Izzy and Kamaru and Francis perceive those comments.
Until the very next sentence, when the mask finally slips off, as Ariel openly states he personally doesn't believe Dricus' clarified words.
And if they want to feign ignorance, that's fine. But all the weirdo fans out there who are pretending like they didn't know exactly what they were saying and what they were doing is just beyond me at this point. God bless. If you think that all he meant was, oh, he wakes up in South Africa and in the continent of Africa and those other guys don't, if that's true, if you were taking it that literally and all he's talking about is African air, then God bless you.
No longer hiding behind the appearance of looking at it from Israel's view. He mocks his audience members for being naive enough to believe Dricus' clarifications from their interview that he conducted, and implies that Dricus has an underlying, more sinister intent.
Then God bless you. Then I appreciate how naive you are. I can tell you, I don't think that that's what they were referring to. And if ultimately all they were trying to do is get a fight, great, they got the fight. Let's not kid ourselves about where it started.
He's gone from being an unbiased enlightener, claiming to be just reporting on the source of the contention.
And to the people out there who are saying you are creating a divide, I'm creating a divide. What are you talking about? I'm trying to enlighten and show you the timeline, the chronology of this whole situation and how it started. That's all we're doing here.
To publicly stating Dricus is feigning ignorance about his race-baiting rhetoric.
I can tell you, I don't think that that's what they were referring to. Now you could say, hey, I didn't mean any of this, and that's great, and I believe that.
Ariel plainly states he doesn't believe what Dricus told him on his show, and that because of the context, he can't turn a blind eye to this situation.
When you take into account the history of that country and everything that comes with it, how we could just turn a blind eye to all of this is beyond me.
Ariel never takes the next step in his argument, but he doesn't need to. He has cited the history of colonization in Africa, whites dominating blacks. He has highlighted the worst he can find from Dricus, saying that he's the real African, and he refused to believe that Dricus simply meant I live in Africa. The conclusion is clear. He's framing Dricus as a Weasley liar, using his whiteness to attack the 3 black African champions' identities, and when pressed on it, is disingenuously retreating to claiming he is only talking about geography.
If you think that all he meant was, oh, he wakes up in South Africa and in the continent of Africa and those other guys don't, if that's true, if you were taking it that literally and all he's talking about is African air, then God bless you. Then I appreciate how naive you are.
Hey, compared to that, Ariel repeating unfounded accusations of a fighter cheating doesn't seem so bad. Am I going to stop listening to Ariel? No, I'm not, and you shouldn't either. He's made his show the best place to listen to high-quality, relevant interviews with MMA personalities, and it's fun listening to his silly takes and the fight picks he and his crew makes. Treat his show as what Ariel himself says it is. 6 to 7 hours every week of fun escapism into the world of MMA. But when it comes to serious issues, or even simply factual reporting on a story, I would not take Ariel seriously. He's too easily biased, and has consistently demonstrated a poor understanding of issues he feels confident talking about. Lastly, while I don't believe colonialist power dynamics are any more relevant to the Dricus Adesanya beef than they are to any other aspect of the sport, the irony of Ariel crying about the effects of apartheid and colonialism while being from Canada, living in America, and fully supporting Israel does not escape me.
I don't know if I've ever gotten so much hate. The vast majority of it would mention that I am Jewish or that I am someone who, supports the state of Israel. It's weird how all that comes up. Why any of that should have anything to do with this is interesting to me. But, there's an obvious reason.
All 3 of these countries have a long history of colonialism and racism benefiting their white populations, with Israel even being a current apartheid state. Maybe instead of telling his audience to do their own research, he should do some himself.
X plus Y is equaling A. You know what I'm saying?
I want to thank everyone for watching this video. I hope you enjoy it. I know it's a long one. If you want more of my thoughts on this subject, let me know in the comments down below, and I'll be happy to post more on this, and have a great week.